The room was so quiet you could hear the soft ticking of the antique clock above the fireplace. 12 mahogany chairs encircled the long glass table, and on each sat a person who had come expecting to inherit something from the man who had held this family together for decades, Charles Whitmore. Except for her. Danica sat at the very end of the room, alone, on a chair that didn't match the others. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, her skin glowing against her cream blouse, her curly black hair pulled into a low bun. No one made eye contact. No one spoke to her, as if her presence alone was a mistake. She wasn't surprised. Charles had adopted her when she was 6, a wide-eyed black girl with no one left and nothing to lose. He'd raised her alongside his 3 biological children in a world of privilege, tradition, and wealth. But Danica never forgot that her roots were different, that whispers followed her at school, in the church pews, and even in this very home. "Let's begin," said the lawyer, his voice slicing through the silence. One by one, the names were called. Land, trusts, properties, jewelry, medium, but not hers. When the last name was read and the will closed with a soft thud, Danica's name had never left the lawyer's lips. Gasps, side eyes, a quiet cough of awkwardness from her younger adoptive brother, Grant. Danica didn't move. She didn't cry. She simply reached into her handbag and pulled out a single white envelope. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm, clear. "I wasn't included in the will," she said, standing slowly. "But there's something you all need to hear. Something Dad told me weeks before he died. Something that changes everything." And with that, she placed the envelope on the table. No one breathed. No one blinked. Because deep down, they all knew this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Danica stood alone in the corridor, the sound of the double oak doors shutting behind her like a verdict. Inside, they were laughing, her siblings, the lawyers, even Harold's third wife, Margaret, whose perfume smelled like roses and rot. It wasn't the money that burned Danica's chest. It was how easily they erased her, like she had never mattered at all. She had grown up in that house. She knew where Harold kept the old records, which floorboard creaked outside his study, and how he liked his coffee, black with a dash of cinnamon. But none of that mattered now. Not to them. Danica reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a wrinkled letter, aged and trembling in her hand. The handwriting was familiar, sharp, deliberate. Harold's. She had found it tucked inside an old Bible he used to carry when he traveled. She hadn't meant to find it. She had been searching for something else, something long buried. But when she read it, her legs had nearly buckled. He had written it after her adoption. A letter filled with regret, guilt, and something deeper, fear. He had known something the others didn't. And maybe that's why. In the end, he tried to hide her truth instead of honor it. The door creaked open behind her. Margaret's heels clicked on the tile, sharp and smug. "You're still here?" she asked. "I would have thought you'd be halfway back to whatever little life you've built for yourself by now." Danica didn't answer. She turned slowly, eyes steady. "He left something for me," she said softly. Margaret chuckled. "Oh, sweetheart. We all heard the will. Harold made it very clear. You're not family." Danica's lips barely moved, but her voice carried like a whisper before a storm. "Not family? Then why was I the only one he asked for at the hospital before he died?" Margaret's smirk wavered. Danica stepped forward. "I didn't come here for scraps. I came here for truth. And I'm not leaving until every last one of you hears it." And with that, Danica walked away, leaving Margaret frozen in place. She clutched the letter in her coat pocket like it was a loaded weapon, because in a way it was. Danica didn't look back as she exited the estate. The cold morning air slapped her skin, but it didn't sting as much as the silence in that room. That silence had been louder than any insult. She was invisible to them, an afterthought, a placeholder in family photos they now kept tucked in dusty drawers. She drove in silence, the roads a blur, her grip tight on the steering wheel. The letter Harold wrote rested on the passenger seat. She hadn't shown it to anyone yet, not because she was unsure of its power, but because she needed to be certain. This wasn't just about money. This was about identity. about secrets buried so deep, even the dead had tried to take them to the grave. At her apartment, she laid everything out on the table. Old photos, records, dates scribbled in the corners of baby pictures that didn't make sense. One black and white image stood out. A woman with Danika's eyes, but not her name. The photo was dated months before Harold and Evelyn had officially adopted her. But this woman wasn't Evelyn. Danica stared at the photo until her vision blurred. Who was this woman? The next morning, she visited a retired nurse from the local hospital, an old friend of her mother's who had once slipped her a hint about the truth. Ms. Corinne opened the door slowly, recognition flickering behind aged eyes. "I always knew you'd come back when the time was right," she whispered. Inside the modest home filled with herbal scents and fading wallpaper, Ms. Corinne spoke slowly, cautiously. She remembered the day Danica was born. She remembered the man who came in the middle of the night, demanding silence. Harold hadn't just adopted Danica. He had taken her quietly, without fanfare, after a deal was made that never sat right with anyone who heard whispers of it. "But who was my real mother?" Danica's voice cracked, her hands trembling. Corinne reached for an old tin box and pulled out a birth certificate. Danica's eyes locked onto the name typed under Mother, Loretta Hawkins. Not Evelyn, not Harold's late wife. Loretta. She was a maid for the family, Corinne said quietly. But she disappeared after you were born. No one ever saw her again. Danica's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Pieces were clicking into place, but they didn't form a picture yet. Only edges and shadows. She left Ms. Corinne's house with the birth certificate folded tightly in her palm. A storm was coming, and she was finally ready to step into it. The next family meeting came unexpectedly. Margaret called it under the guise of clearing the air. But Danica knew better. They wanted to shut her up. The will had already been executed, assets distributed. Any whisper of scandal could unravel their clean little narrative. Danica arrived late. On purpose. They sat in Harold's study, stiff-backed and sipping from crystal glasses as if nothing in the world could touch them. But the moment Danica stepped in and dropped the envelope on the table, the temperature shifted. "What's this?" her half-brother Kyle asked, his voice thick with disdain. Danica didn't blink. The truth. She revealed the birth certificate first. The name Loretta stunned them into silence. But then she laid down the letter. Harold's handwriting, his confession, his shame. He had fallen in love with Loretta, a black woman working for his family in secret. Their love was real, but forbidden. When Loretta became pregnant, Harold panicked. He sent her away, paid her silence, promised he'd protect the child. But Loretta vanished. Days later, he showed up with a baby and a lie. "You were all told I was adopted," Danica said. "But I wasn't. I was hidden." Gasps filled the room. Margaret's glass slipped from her hand and shattered. Kyle stood. "Even if that were true, there's no proof you're his biological daughter." Danica pulled out the DNA results. She didn't flinch as the paper slid across the polished mahogany. Harold was her father, not by adoption, by blood. Every eye turned to her now, not with pity or contempt, but with disbelief. "Fear. You tried to erase me," Danica said quietly. "But I was never gone. I was just waiting." No one spoke, not even Margaret. The empire they had built on lies was crumbling, and the woman they thought they buried beneath silence had just risen. Danica didn't ask for money. Not yet. She didn't scream or threaten. She let the weight of the truth settle in the room like a fog that refused to lift. Justice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it walked in on silent heels, dropped a folder on the table, and waited for the guilt to swallow everyone whole. When Danica left the room, the air felt lighter. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a stranger in her own story. They had stolen her name, her history, her mother. But now she had something they couldn't take back. The truth. And it was only just beginning to hurt. Danica didn't sleep that night. She sat by her window, watching the streetlights flicker over cracked pavement, her mind racing. The look on Margaret's face, the trembling in Kyle's voice. It wasn't satisfaction she felt. Not yet. This wasn't about revenge. It was about closure, about finally hearing the words she had needed her whole life. You belong here. But she hadn't heard them. Not from any of them. Instead, the silence lingered like smoke after a fire. The next morning, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. I saw what you did, a woman's voice said. I knew your mother. Loretta. Danika's breath caught. Who is this? Name's Vivian. Loretta was my best friend. I've been waiting for years for someone to come looking. They met in a quiet cafe on the edge of town. Vivian was older now, her eyes tired but sharp. She carried a worn photo of her and Loretta, laughing on a porch with a baby in her lap. Danica. She didn't disappear, Vivian said. She was sent away. Threatened. Vivian told her everything. Harold had promised to support Loretta and their child, but Margaret had found out. And Margaret had made it clear, if Loretta stayed, she'd ruin her. She paid her to vanish, sent her across the country with barely enough money to survive. She was scared, Vivian said, voice cracking. But she never stopped loving you. She thought it was safer for you if she stayed away. Danika's hand shook as she held the photo. All her life, she had imagined Loretta as a question mark. Now, she had her face, her truth, her love. Vivian reached into her purse and handed Danica a stack of letters. These were returned. She wrote them to you. Every birthday, every Christmas. Danica took the bundle, trembling. Pages of longing, of sorrow, of motherly pride, even from afar. Letters that had been intercepted, unread, stolen from her like everything else. When she got home, Danica read every single one. She cried until the sun came up. Meanwhile, inside the Wellington estate, panic had begun to take root. Margaret called an emergency meeting with the family attorney. Danica's DNA results had shaken the foundation of the will. If proven legitimate, everything they had claimed was theirs could now legally belong to her. Margaret refused to believe Harold would do this. But deep down she knew. She had known it for years. The quiet way Harold looked at Danica sometimes. The guilt that hung in his silence whenever her name came up. Margaret hadn't just erased Loretta. She had tried to erase Harold's shame. But now the ink was bleeding through. I want her out of the picture, Margaret said coldly. But Kyle wasn't so sure. He had watched Danica in that room. Watched the quiet power with which she stood, not asking, but knowing. Something about it made him uneasy. She wasn't going to back down. Danica hired her own attorney, not to fight over the money, but to correct the birth certificate, to legally claim her name, her paternity, her place in the family record forever. A reporter caught wind of the case. And when Danica refused to stay silent any longer, the story made headlines. Black woman left out of white family will reveals DNA secret that changes everything. The public reaction was instant. Social media erupted. People demanded justice. Others speculated wildly. But through it all, Danica kept her voice measured. Calm. Factual. I'm not fighting for money, she said during a local interview. I'm fighting for truth. For my mother, who died with no justice. For every child erased because their presence made someone uncomfortable. The public stood behind her. And inside the estate, Margaret was losing control. She tried to claim the documents were forged. Tried to twist the story, calling Danica an opportunist, a liar. But she underestimated one thing. Harold had recorded a video before his death. He had confessed everything. It was stored in a safe deposit box Danica only learned about after Vivian gave her a final letter from Loretta with a key taped to the back. She sat in a bank alone when the video played. Harold, older, weary, stared into the camera. Danica, if you're seeing this, I've passed on, and I've failed you. You're my daughter. You always were. I was too much of a coward to protect your mother when she needed me most. I hope one day you'll forgive me. Danica sat frozen. Her father had said the words. On camera, there was no more denying it. She released the footage publicly. Margaret's influence evaporated. Lawsuits followed. The court issued an emergency injunction to re-evaluate the will. Danica's legal status was now a matter of state interest. But even through the storm, Danica stayed grounded. She walked through fire not to burn others, but to light the path that had once been kept in darkness. And she wasn't done yet. The court hearing was set. Media trucks parked outside the courthouse, their antennas reaching toward the sky like vultures waiting to swoop. Danica stepped out of the car in a modest navy dress, her expression steady. Not triumphant, not vengeful, just ready. Inside, Margaret sat stiff in a designer suit, her lips a hard line. She had aged in just weeks. Scandal clung to her like a second skin. Kyle kept his eyes down, the rest of the family whispering behind dark glasses and practiced expressions. But the truth had already cracked their polished image wide open. Danica's attorney stood first. He spoke plainly. This isn't just about inheritance. This is about truth. About a black woman erased from her bloodline to protect a legacy built on lies. He played the video of Harold's confession. The courtroom went silent. Even Margaret flinched when Harold's voice filled the space. His regret, his admission, his hope that one day Danica would forgive them all. Margaret's attorney objected, claimed coercion. But the judge, a woman with tired eyes and a no-nonsense tone, overruled it. When Danica took the stand, she held nothing back. I didn't come here to destroy a family, she said. I came here to reclaim my place in it. Her words struck deeper than any lawsuit ever could. Some in the courtroom wiped tears. Even Kyle looked shaken. Margaret, however, remained unmoved. Ice behind her eyes. The ruling wasn't immediate. The judge needed time, but the momentum had shifted. Public sympathy lay firmly with Danica, and in private, support grew louder. One morning, a letter arrived in Danica's mailbox. No return address, just a single sentence inside. I was your mother's nurse. I know what Margaret did. Danica tracked the sender, an elderly woman named Mrs. Ayers, now retired. When Danica visited, the woman trembled as she handed over a sealed envelope. She made us sign NDAs back then, the nurse said. But I kept this. I knew it would matter one day. Inside was a photocopy of a birth certificate, the original one. The one that named Harold Wellington as the father and Loretta James as the mother. A document that had mysteriously vanished decades ago. Danica's hands shook. This was more than evidence. It was proof of the conspiracy. She filed it with the court immediately. But it wasn't just the courtroom where change was happening. Kyle reached out privately. No cameras. No lawyers. I don't know what to say, he muttered. We were told things, ugly things. That you weren't really hers. That you were trying to steal what wasn't yours. Danica looked him in the eyes. And now, I don't know if we'll ever be a real family. But I believe you. I believe Dad. And I'm sorry. It wasn't absolution. But it was a crack in the wall. Meanwhile, Margaret's empire was crumbling. Silent investors pulled out. Charities distanced themselves. A petition to remove her from the board of the Wellington Foundation gained over 200,000 signatures. Still, she refused to publicly apologize until she was subpoenaed to testify under oath. On the day she took the stand, the room pulsed with anticipation. Cameras weren't allowed, but reporters lined the walls, pens poised like daggers. Margaret's hands trembled as she adjusted the microphone. For the first time, her voice faltered. Yes, I knew about Loretta, she said. Yes, I paid her to leave. A murmur spread through the room. She was a distraction, a scandal. Harold and I had just launched the foundation. We couldn't afford that kind of chaos. When asked if she ever felt remorse, Margaret paused, then quietly said, every single day. It wasn't enough to undo the years, but it was a crack in her porcelain armor, and it was all the court needed. 2 weeks later, the ruling came in. Danica James Wellington was declared the legal daughter of Harold Wellington, entitled to her rightful share of the estate and legally recognized in the family records. The will was reopened. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed her, shouting questions. Danica, what will you do with the money? She looked past the cameras, past the flashing lights, and simply said, I'm going to build something that can't be taken away. And she meant it. But even with the truth in the open, one last secret still waited, buried deeper than any court document could uncover. A truth about what really happened to Loretta, and who else had known the entire time. Danica sat alone in her apartment, her father's watch in one hand and the old photo of her mother in the other. The ruling had been made, The world knew the truth, but closure wasn't a courtroom verdict. It was personal, it was quiet, and it was overdue. A knock at her door. When she opened it, she didn't expect to see her. Margaret stood there, no security, no sunglasses, no press in sight. Just an old woman with too many secrets and not enough time left to bury them. "Don't slam the door," Margaret said, voice cracking. "Just let me say what I should have said 30 years ago." Danica hesitated, then stepped aside. Margaret sat down slowly, fingers clenched in her lap. "I hated how easily he loved you," she said, eyes glassy. "How he lit up when you were around. I spent years convincing myself that it was business, that it was strategy, but it wasn't." Danica didn't respond. She didn't have to. Margaret finally spoke the words she never thought she would say. "I was wrong. I let pride and fear steal a child's place in her own family. And I don't expect forgiveness, but I came to give you something. Something I kept hidden." From her purse, Margaret pulled out a letter. Sealed. A different handwriting on the front. "It's from your mother, Loretta. She wrote it the day she left. I found it, but I never gave it to Harold." Danica's breath caught. She opened the envelope with trembling fingers. "My sweet Danica, I never wanted to leave you, but they made it clear I wasn't welcome. They offered money, but I wasn't for sale. You weren't for sale. I chose to leave so they wouldn't take you from me completely. I hope one day you'll understand. And I pray that someday someone will see the truth in your eyes and fight for you like I couldn't. Love always, Mom." Tears streamed down Danica's face as she read it aloud. Margaret cried too, for the first time without shame. "I took your mother's voice from you," Margaret whispered, "but I can't silence her anymore." Danica looked at her, this broken woman who had once been her enemy, and nodded. "You can't rewrite the past," she said softly, "but you can stop hiding from it." In the following months, Danica didn't disappear like so many assumed she would. She showed up. She donated part of her inheritance to launch the Loretta Center for Equity and Justice, a legal nonprofit focused on helping disinherited children, silenced voices, and victims of family abuse. At the grand opening, she spoke through tears. Justice doesn't always wear a robe. Sometimes it looks like a voice that refuses to be quiet. Sometimes it looks like healing. And sometimes it looks like a woman who was once told she was nobody, standing here today, knowing she is everything her mother hoped she would become. Kyle attended the opening. So did Mrs. Ayers. And even Margaret, sitting quietly in the back, hands folded, eyes full of what might have been regret, or maybe peace. Danica stood in front of the crowd, stronger than ever. "I didn't get justice because I had money. I got it because I had the truth and the courage to stand in it, no matter how long it took." If you're watching this and you've been shut out, silenced, or told you don't belong, don't believe it. Your story matters. Your truth matters. She closed with her mother's words, engraved on a plaque beside the building's entrance. "They offered money, but we weren't for sale." And as the applause roared, Danica knew something for certain. What they tried to hide didn't bury her. It built her. To everyone watching, if this story moved you, don't let it end here. Like, subscribe, share it. Let someone out there know they are not alone. Because the truth, it always finds a way.